This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by The Fire Store. Learn more about getting the gear you need at prices you can afford by visiting thefirestore.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Zamzow. With me today, I have Janelle Fosquet, the editor-in-chief of Fire Rescue One, and also a friend of the program, a mentor of mine, someone that we also a lot of times will consult because he is one of our esteemed advisors and board members of Fire Rescue One. We have Chief Marc Bashoor here. Just so you guys remember, like, Chief has had his hands in a lot throughout his career. And recently we've had a lot of discussions with him about just the current climate in politics and government and how it's affecting the fire service. And we're going to dig into that. But before I do, Chief, welcome back to the program. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Sam. Doing real well. How about you? And hi, Janelle.
We're doing great. It's a conversation that, we've had, we had you on with Dr. Lori and Josh Waldo, who is who just, passed the baton as the IEFC president on. We were talking about some of the current climate right after they closed the National Fire Academy. And,
Right.
and your experience goes back extensively. Like, you used to be public safety director in Highlands County, Florida, chief of Prince George's County in Maryland, and also emergency manager in Mineral County, West Virginia. But I think one of the real things that I always count on you for, if I ever have questions, there's quite a few things, but one of the real areas you're so good at is the politics of the fire service, not only like local, but federal level. You also have quite a few contacts that you've accumulated throughout your career within, the city, the federal, and states. And you really understand kind of both angles, and we'll dig into that a little bit. One of the things that really sparked this particular podcast is that this is the 20-year mark. This week is the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina that really devastated parts of New Orleans. And obviously in the news, there's FEMA. And, I think the conversations about FEMA and its effectiveness really resort back to that, even before that. And we'll dig a little bit, into that. And actually, that really starts with a great question. Is, Chief, where are we right now with our political environment and FEMA?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zam. I think one of the problems is we can't answer that question definitively every day because the rules change every day. I can tell you that the floods in Texas were a demonstration of the dysfunction that was established with the $100,000 limit requirement for approvals. When you talk about pre-positioning USAR assets and Swiftwater assets and those types of things, those aren't $100,000 propositions. That's significantly more money. Those are things that take time. And the pre-positioning that used to be allowed as part of the normal way of doing business would get those assets on the street and would get those, would get all the wheels in motion at the local governments who knew they were going to depend on reimbursement down the road. So they were, allowing those people to do the things they do. Without that pre-positioning approval, those triggers don't get pulled, which means those people sit, those assets sit, and the response is delayed. Would it have made a difference in lives? I can't answer that question. That's a chance we won't have. But I can tell you it delayed getting assets to Texas. And so to your question of where we are today with it, we continue to be in what I'll call a seizure state, that one directive will come out and then another one will come out and some people will be terminated or allowed to retire. And, I saw the group of current and former FEMA employees who sent a letter petition to Congress just this week. As we're taping, it happened this week. And in that position paper, both current and former employees, they detail 6 specific things that they want Congress, and encourage, if we're able to put that up on here, that you'll be able to see it. But that is an example of the seizure state that I say we're in. When the current and former employees are banding together under clear fear for their jobs, because let's face it, some of those current employees might not be current employees by the time the administration's done, based on the way they've reacted to other folks that have done things like this. But they specifically mention in their petition to Congress that the preposition, or the $100,000 requirement, is it dynamically changes FEMA's response capacity in from a perspective of getting stuff there, and that's going to cause a problem in the next disaster. It's just a matter of when. It's not if, it's when. So we are in a state that I can't answer that question. We still don't have a confirmed FEMA administrator to be able to answer any of those questions. And while I was heartened to see the administration say that they were no longer targeting FEMA for elimination, I think that's a good thing. I think there needs to be some level of FEMA. I'm still not sure what that level will look like when the administration's done.
Yeah. Well, and it's the timing is so appropriate, right? When you think back, because 20 years ago, FEMA was under fire for the response to Katrina, launched a lot of questions about what the appropriate response looks like. But certainly since then, FEMA has responded to countless incidents. And now here we are in hurricane season. There was this initial announcement that FEMA was going to be phased out after this hurricane season.
Right.
Lining up with the 20-year anniversary of Katrina, I think made a lot of people say, wait, is this the right thing to do here? So there has been a lot of back and forth. We've covered this extensively on Fire Rescue One, and I will include that link, but we have a long document that captures all the back and forth that's happened around FEMA, and I'll include that latest news story as well. But just in the context of Katrina, like, what is that? How does that change your thoughts on what's happening right now at the federal level?
Well, that's actually a great and interesting question, because if you really dive into Katrina, and I know we don't have time to dive in that far into it here, but if you really dive into it, the cascading failures began at the local level, which is how all emergencies begin. All of these disasters begin as local emergencies, and the local first responders are the first ones to go, followed up by a county or a parish or a jurisdiction, and then by the state, and eventually by the federal government. So from the beginning, there are documented dysfunctions that I think some of those dysfunctions are understandable considering the catastrophic nature of the flooding and what was going on there. But you'll read, if you read some of the reports, that the state government had a particular dysfunction communicating with the federal government. They were already fighting about other things, and it was already a contentious relationship. So when it came time for the mayor to make an evacuation order for the city, he didn't make the order. He made it a voluntary, and then later made it an order. And then the governor didn't make any request to Washington because of his dysfunction with the federal government. So it was a cascade of local problems in the beginning that led to a slow FEMA response. Well, when you slow the FEMA response down, those cascading problems that were already happening at the local level are just going to get worse because they don't have the support or the capacity to handle those. So while FEMA took a lot of the brunt of people's ire after Katrina, the reality was that ire needs to be spread around, and the local and state governments, after action report after action report, identify that the local and state governments had issues dealing with it. I suspect they've gone through and actually learned the lessons, not just by implementing new policies, not just identifying the problems, but learning the actual lessons and doing something about it. But I don't know that for sure. I do know that FEMA cannot respond today Even if they were identified as problematic 20 years ago, they could have prepositioned and done things 20 years ago that they can't do today based on the $100,000 requirement, approval requirement. So I think that there were a lot of different, there was a reorganization after Katrina. There was a reorganization after Sandy. There's been 6 different reorganizations, if you will, by executive order under FEMA. Every time there's a disaster, there was another executive order that addressed the certain aspects of the formation of FEMA. So I don't think it's fair to say that FEMA was the problem in Katrina. FEMA was part of the problem. And if we stick to the doctrine that we should all stick to, that FEMA is not supposed to come there and be in charge. FEMA is a support function. If we can stick to that mantra and understand that FEMA is a support function, then we need to bolster our local and state responsibilities. So from that perspective, it sounds like I'm supporting what the administration's saying, that the states and locals need to support. Well, the states and locals have always supposed to have been in charge and always supposed to handle these things. And FEMA has always supposed to be a support function. So while I know that there have been some allegations of federal overreach with the way FEMA comes in and sets up different distribution sites and all those things, they don't do that on their own. They do that in concert with the local governments. And I've experienced it in my home state in Florida, where they came in and worked with the state government and worked with the local governments. I went door to door with during last year in 2024's hurricanes, and I went door to door on disaster assessments as a volunteer for FEMA. There wasn't dysfunction, there wasn't overreach. There were some problems. Most of them were technical glitches. People don't have access to the internet because it's been washed away or whatever. I mean, you deal with those things. And I think people blame FEMA for a lot of things they shouldn't be blaming FEMA for, and they need to turn the camera around and look at themselves.
Yeah, it seems to be that FEMA's always been a scapegoat, right? Like they're either deployed too late, or when they're deployed, they're, spread too thin, or, they don't work well with the agencies that are trying to deploy them, right? There seems to be just this litany of reasons why it's not working. And I think you wrote a great article on that. 20 years after Katrina, FEMA stands at the crossroads, and we'll leave a link to that really kind of describes some of those issues. And the other question is, what is being proposed as? So if it's not FEMA, what is the alternative?
Well, what the president has said, and he said it numerous times, is that he wants to push more responsibility and authority down to the states. So I go back to the what we talked about. The doctrine of FEMA talks about FEMA being a support function because the disasters all start at that local and state level. They don't start at the FEMA level. They start at the local and state level. So what he's saying is what should have been going on all along, and that is the local and state governments are responsible for their disasters until they need extra help, and then they can call the federal government. Well, I think it's what we've been doing. But the notion that all 50 states can or do have the same capacity or can act in the same manner is just, it's nonsense. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a firefighter. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out.
Or a fire chief. Come on now, not just a firefighter. I got to stick up for my guys here.
Or a lieutenant.
Yeah, or a lieutenant. Thank you.
So it doesn't take a lot to look at the 50 states and understand that we don't have the same capacities, that we don't have the same financial resources, the same fire department resources, same emergency management resources. It just doesn't exist. And we saw from floods in North Carolina, floods in Texas, the fires in California, the hurricanes in Florida. I mean, the tornadoes in the Midwest that happen everywhere. These disasters that exceed the local response capacity are happening every day. And I think just blanketly saying we're pushing it down to the states is a program that's destined to fail.
Yeah. because the first natural disaster that a state's not prepared, which pretty much a lot of them are not, right? Where are we going to go? These people still need help. We still need
Yeah.
response. We still need resources.
Yeah.
The other side of FEMA that I'd like to just address a little bit is, so our discussion back with Dr. Lori and Josh a few months ago when they closed the National Fire Academy, there's the other side of FEMA that's funding the fire service and the grants. And so explain just a little bit about why, it is important to stay kind of up to date on what's FEMA and what they're doing, and especially like the U.S. Fire Administration, because we are underneath that FEMA wing, correct?
Yeah. So, if you look back, and I believe we have an article, maybe Janelle is able to put up as well, where we talked about some of that in the beginning of this whole discussion months and months ago, and that the U.S. Fire Administration, when it was formed, was a presidential appointee, was at one point under the Department of Commerce, and then moved from the Department of Commerce. It ended up under FEMA, and then after 9/11, FEMA ended up under the Department of Homeland Security. So we were originally kind of up here, and now we're kind of somewhere down here. And the fire service lost a lot of I'll say it lost a lot of its seat at the table.
Yeah.
And we ended up with kind of a seat at the kids table.
We're in the Thanksgiving table where the left-handers go. I can relate to that, right? Like it's a little kids table where we get sometimes the crumbs or things are passed past us, and then we got to, come screaming for them. Yeah. I think that's a great analogy for that. But, and with the funding and cutting to FEMA, that's also affecting grants and a lot of things that are related to the USFA. I mean, we still don't have, administrator. We don't really, there's a lot of things there that we are still trying to figure out on that level too, right? Like,
sure. Yeah. The U.S. Fire Administrator still hasn't been confirmed. I did speak with Chief Black at Fire Rescue International when I was there. So it was good to see her out. Unfortunately, we're kind of still in that stalemate. And when you look at the folks at the upper level that are making some of these decisions on what monies to allocate, when they're thinking about programs, they're thinking about right now, they're thinking about the squeakiest wheel. And the fire service has not always been one to squeak. Okay, I'll say it that way. The fire service has not always done a really good job of getting out and having their voice heard at the federal level. So that's one of the things that people can do, and they should, chiefs especially should do if they have not already, is to join the Congressional Fire Service Institute. The Fire Caucus used to be the largest caucus in Congress. I don't believe it is any longer, but it used to be the largest caucus in Congress because it became very popular. Because I don't know what the because was. Some people said it was because all the people in shiny uniforms showed up at the offices, and it was just an opportunity to be seen with the fire service, who the public generally speaks real highly of. But when we're talking about millions and hundreds of millions of dollars being allocated at that federal level, that's where CFSI, Congressional Fire Service Institute, comes in, is to be able to increase that seat at the table and potentially get us bumped back up where we are, to help with the lobbying, to help with the laws and the executive orders that might impact us. And you've seen a lot of that where CFSI will put out a call for action. And I try to do everything I can to get those calls for action. I serve for Fire Rescue One on the National Advisory Committee with CFSI. And we are trying the best we can to get the word out about the necessity for chiefs to become involved. Not just chiefs, but chiefs are the ones who are going to speak for their departments and for their organizations. So we need them to be able to come to the table if we're going to make a difference, if we're going to save this grant money, and if we're going to make sure that the politicians understand what's important to the fire service. There's not subject matter experts up there other than Chief Black and the folks working underneath of her. Above that, they're not fire service people. There might be one or two here or there. So it's important for us to make our voices heard, or or we're going to lose.
Yeah. And I know the IFC was Chief Wolford and, IFF with, Ed Kelly and there are some representatives up there, but, I think you hit a great point, Chief. Like we in the fire service aren't really good at promoting ourselves, and we haven't been for years because that's not why we got into the fire service, right? Like we're not like NFL players. Every time we make a tackle 5 yards down the field, we're going to shout and scream and say, look at us, look at us. But in a way, we have to start, I think, thinking about at least educating people about what we really have to go through and why we need funds, why we need administrative support. And, for those listening, that really like to always hear us talk about fire attack and all the sexy, cool things. Look, how does this affect all that? Well, your fire hose, your fire apparatus, the cost of doing business as a fire service, which helps keep us safe. And that goes all the way from codes and standards to the cost of all the stuff, right? It happens a lot of times through conversations that we're having, through research, through signing up through CFSI. Did I get that right, by the way? Is it right? CFSI? I'm horrible with all these acronyms, but I think I nailed that one, which is why people need to know what is CFSI and why should I be a part of it? Why should I support it? We talk about FEMA on this major level and how, right now we're kind of set up for failure. Unfortunately, if there is another major catastrophe, there are some cuts there. Now, you and I we're at agreement with this. We're not necessarily saying this is totally horrible, right? We kind of agree. Sometimes it's really good to kind of trim the fat and get more lean and figure out your processes. I mean, looking at best case scenario here, you and I are talking a couple 6 months from now. If we're going, hey, this is looking pretty good, what does that look like? What does that conversation sound like?
Well, I mean, I would hope that they would streamline when we talk about cutting the fat. I would hope that they would streamline the way the processes work. So right now, the let's face it, the whole DOGE thing was originally the digital government service. That was originally their intention and their focus under the previous administration was to streamline digital services within the government. And what that would do is streamline the grant processes and streamline the communication systems between governments. That's what I would hope it would look like, is that if we're going to cut, then let's cut those layers that interfere with us being able to use technology to our best and to be able to communicate, seamlessly about these programs and in instance, instead of waiting months and months for a bureaucratic review of something that just doesn't need to exist. Yeah. So I think if the administration is true to what they're saying, that's what it'll look like, is we will streamline processes that will allow the federal government to communicate quicker with the states and with the local governments. Unfortunately, I think there will be less money. Again, I'll go back to, I recognize we're in a deficit situation at the federal government and we've got to do something somehow. I just don't know that emergency response is the right place to be doing it.
Yeah. We don't close our doors. You and I said that before, right. Cutting services from a business that operates 24/7, 7 days a week, and I even say, more than that. Yeah. I mean, it's just, we're just trying to set ourselves up to be, slightly successful at the next emergency situation. Chief Fennessy mentioned too, with the wildfires that went through LA and LA County, a lot of times it takes days to deploy payment and they actually amongst themselves just get on the phone, bypass all that, right, and backpedal and say, this is how we're going to pay for it. And I think he's also a big advocate for streamlining services, streamlining processes, especially in these disasters. And, and I think that's probably one of the big hangups that we've kind of hit with FEMA, but it's not all through FEMA. There's a lot to go through that. Kind of piggybacking on the last question, where does the USFA fit? Where should we be ultimately? Yeah.
So another article for Janelle to hopefully put up is the one I did quite a while back about one federal parent. The fire service, if you look at the fire service and include EMS in that. So fire and EMS service, or EMS and fire service to make my EMS friends happy. The EMS and fire service, if you look at that, firefighters currently fall under 6 different federal agencies. Agriculture, Interior, the Department of Defense. I could go on with all of them if I could remember them all at this moment. But the firefighters currently fall under 6 different federal departments, which creates this bifurcated system of operation. So whether it's ICS or whether it's tactical gear for wildland firefighters or wildland gear for structural firefighters, there's a disconnect, a huge disconnect. Now this administration did combine the agriculture and interior firefighters down into one. I believe they're in interior now. So that was good. But then if you look at the other pieces of what we do, EMS, and I understand why it's there. I just think it's a ridiculous mindset to continue to have EMS fall under the Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
So, I'm told that the stories were that the reason it fell under the Department of Transportation is because car wrecks were boogering up. That's a technical word. We're boogering up the roads.
I understand that technical. You're speaking.
Yeah, I mean, they were boogering up the roads, and the transportation officials wanted to clear the roads, so they decided the best way to do it was to take EMS under their control and be able to speed up clearing the roads, which is a commerce-related thing, to get commerce moving and all of those pieces. But today, EMS continues to fall under the Department of Transportation. 911's under the Department of Transportation and the FCC and 2 other federal groups. So we are so bifurcated, and I think that where we ought to be is all of those 911 functions. Keep police under Department of Justice. I think the Department of Justice and law enforcement is a good fit. But having firefighters under 6 different federal agencies and having EMS under the Department of Transportation, when we're all operating out of the same buildings, we're all doing the same business, we're all answering the 911 calls, but we've got 6 or 7 different federal parents up here trying to tell us what to do. It is a recipe that has clearly created a disaster, since we're talking about FEMA.
No pun intended,
that I hope one federal parent could fix. And I think, would that be difficult? Absolutely, it'd be difficult. It's not an easy thing to transfer, because you're not just transferring people, you're transferring budgets, you're transferring functions, you're transferring programs. A lot of things have to happen. But if no one steps up to do it, it'll never happen.
The Fire Store, equipping protectors with passion. Every decision we make as a company is about you, our customer. We wouldn't be where we are today without you, and we don't take that lightly. We understand that having the right gear can mean the difference between life and death. Our goal is to get you the gear you need, when you need it, at prices you can afford. Visit us at thefirestore.com for everything but the truck, and shop our family of brands, including Streamlight, MSA, Lion, FLIR, and more. Now let's get back to the show.
Mark, one of the things I really appreciate about so much of what you write for us is this historical perspective, right? In the context, you mentioned the deficit. You have a great article that explains kind of how we ended up where we are and kind of looking back at previous administrations, because it's so easy to just blame whatever the current scenario is,
Sure,
right?
Sure.
But then when you look back, even on the historical context of how the USFA landed where it is, it just helps paint a picture, and it also helps make the argument for what should be or what changes could happen. So I think with that in mind, I just want to come back to this idea of what people need to do or what's important to them, because figuring out what's important to them all plays into the historical context, and everybody comes at it from a different angle and from different experience. And so for the people listening to this thinking, okay, CFSI, I can reach out to them, but I don't exactly know what to say. In this context around FEMA, and I know USAR is something that you're really passionate about, but what are the different ideas that people can write to their legislators about, that puts it in perspective, not only for them, but for their communities?
Sure. Well, so first and foremost, people need to focus on the number one thing that we do, and that's providing service. So yes, there there are some things that we need to do at the federal level and at the local level as far as politics go. But we need to remember that our service, and I will highlight the discipline, right? The discipline part of what we do needs to be about service. And that service must be apolitical. There must not be a Democratic or a Republican swing to the service that we provide. So as you talk about what we're going to do to hopefully preserve programs or to talk to our elected officials, we need to make sure people first understand that service needs to be their primary focus, and that no 911 caller has ever called and said, send me those Republican firefighters or send me those Democratic EMTs. They call and they need help. So with that said, I think the thing that people need to do, the things that people need to do relate to talking to their elected officials, and not just writing to them, not just emailing them, but talking to them, and talking to them with a passion, not with an anger, but with a passion for the service they deliver and how the current dysfunction impacts their ability to make that delivery professional. And remember, professional is not a paycheck. So this message is for volunteer and paid firefighters, that we need to get out and talk to the elected officials, have some sit downs with them, bring them in. I love the IAFF's Fire Ops 101 program that brings in not only media, but elected officials and whomever they can bring in. CFSI actually does its own Fire Ops 101 with the IAFF at the University of Maryland every year, where congressmen and congresswomen come in and go through the program. Those types of things are the grassroots things, or what our firefighters need to become involved in. And of course, our chiefs need to speak for our departments, like I said earlier. And if they want to delegate that to other firefighters, that's up to those chiefs. But if we can get them engaged in talking, sitting down at town halls, when your elected officials have a town hall, show up in force, show up with your fire truck, show up with your people, and make sure that you are heard loud and clear. They need to hear from us and hear what's important, or we're just the ones sitting in the background accepting whatever comes down the path. CFSI is working on some of those bigger things. I think one of you said that earlier, is the kind of those macro things is where CFSI is up here dealing with those bigger issues. A lot of these lower things, lower level, lower hanging fruit, just talking to your elected officials, we can all do that. But we tend to get a couple things happen. We'll send the wrong people. So who are the wrong people? We send the people who are angry, and they show up and they start yelling or using profanity or just saying the wrong things. That's not the people that we need to have talking to our elected officials. We need to have the people that are prepared to be professional and are prepared to have a level head and are prepared to have the passion and the discipline to do the right thing when they walk in the door to talk to these people. So if we can just get people to understand that they have to be part of this verbal process, not just send an email. Yes, you got to send emails to elected officials when we send out that blast saying, hey, but we need you to show up, and we need you to be passionate about the things that are important to us as a fire service. Again, otherwise we're going to fail. I hope that answers what you were asking.
Yeah, and I think
absolutely.
I think that really puts the exclamation point on what we were talking about before, as far as, fire service. We need to market what we do, what we need, why we do what we do. And, I think too, Chief, you would agree with me that, when we're in a grocery store, it's a great time to just market with people. If we're at a call and it's a little less security, right? Like, educate people. Why do we have an engine in a med unit on scene? Why does that engine have duct tape all over it? Because we can't afford, right?
Yeah.
Like, whatever it might be. I think that goes into, also FEMA, right? Original discussion is why FEMA can be valuable. and why it's needed in some capacity. I think sometimes is educate yourself and then others
Sure.
around you, right? Like,
Yeah.
and going back to the FEMA thing too, when people say, we don't need it, what's a great response for that, especially like around the firehouse table, right? Like I'm thinking tomorrow I'm going to say, hey, Chief Bashoor and I talked about FEMA, and guys will go, we don't need FEMA.
Yeah. So the first response I have to that is none of us knows it all, because if we did, none of us would be here. If we knew it all, we would have solved all the fire problems and all the disaster problems of the world, and we wouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah.
So the notion that we don't need help is another nonsensical notion. And the notion that, you can talk to a New York City firefighter or fire chief who will have a completely different outlook on FEMA after 9/11 than they did prior to 9/11. But they'll also have a completely different outlook on FEMA today than, say, a firefighter in Boise, Idaho. The people Boise, Idaho, who's removed from Washington, who doesn't deal with the federal government on a regular basis, who doesn't deal with the politicians on a regular basis, they have a skewed look at what the federal government can or can't do versus the local and state level, versus New York City, who has millions and millions of people, who has lots of assets, 15,000 firefighters. They can do a lot by themselves. But even they understood on 9/11 that there was a need for federal support. And that's why I say their outlook dynamically changed after having to have that disaster. So heaven forbid that that's the answer to your question, that we need to tell people, just wait for your disaster and you'll see.
Yeah.
That's not the way we should be. I mean, we need to understand that none of us knows everything, and none of us does this alone. We're all in this together. I mean, you think about, I know it's not FEMA specifically, but I kind of argued this point for FEMA at a hearing in Washington on sprinklers. These were specifically, we were trying to get the Department of Housing and Urban Development to put sprinklers in FEMA trailers, okay? So that we could show some support for sprinkler legislation. And we could not get the federal government to allow sprinklers to be put in FEMA trailers, residential sprinklers, to be put into FEMA trailers. Now, my experience with sprinklers from Prince George's County, I can tell you that during the 30 years, well, it wasn't 30 years that they were in effect, but since they went into effect in 1992, the fire death rate in total, and this is with a population rise, reduced by 60%. But the number of deaths in sprinkler protected homes, which we had over 600 activations of sprinklers in the study that I had done, the number of deaths in those homes, zero.
Yep.
0 people. Where in the same, if you take the same statistical analysis, 68 people would have died if those sprinklers had not been in. So there have been some failures of sprinkler systems. So that's what we learn from. We learn from those things and we figure out whether it's maintenance because they're freezing or whatever the issue is. So I say all that to say that to your question about what do we tell people at the kitchen table, and I said none of us knows it all. Well, one thing we do know is sprinklers save lives, okay? And we know that if we could advocate for sprinklers, we could save a lot of lives and we could extinguish a lot of fires quicker and save a lot of property. But we don't advocate for it. We don't, as a fire service, advocate for it. And it's the same thing that's happening right now with FEMA. We're not advocating for it as a whole. We're allowing it to sit in this seizure state. And I know there are people doing things. We're doing it right here, trying to raise awareness. But in general, most people will do exactly what you just said, Sam, is they'll sit there at the table and go, we don't need FEMA.
You don't need it. Yeah. Which also, if they really understood the system and say, we don't need FEMA. Well, right now, USFA falls under that. So we don't need that either.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, I think, whether they want to call it something different too. I mean, maybe it's time for, a rebranding. Cause I mean, you also have USAR underneath that too. Whether it's, do they want that to go away? Do they want the USFA to go away? I mean, you go down this huge path of like, and all the grants that would go along with it,
Right. Right.
and not that we're saying that FEMA needs to, is the be all end all, but it's like a backup line,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Let's be honest too about the grants. The grants really are a backup line. We've been saying for years that those grants weren't going to be around forever, and I think we're seeing that happening now. While we still have some of them, I think we're about half of where we had been as far as appropriations. I don't think, again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to read the tea leaves on this. And the admonition I've been making to people is, to chiefs, is you need to, get your house in order with respect to your finances, because those grants are most likely not going to be around.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point I become a realist in this. All right. And I can fight all day long, but we've still got to go back to what I talked about, service. We still got to provide service and do our job. So at some point we have to be a realist about where we are. And I hope that folks are having those conversations at the kitchen table and talking about, if FEMA were to go away, what can we, what are we going to have to do? How are we going to handle that next disaster? Who are we going to call? And it's not going to be Ghostbusters.
Right. You never need you don't need FEMA until you do. You don't need a backup line until you do, right?
For the younger generation of firefighters.
Oh yeah. What's a Ghostbuster? Yeah.
I get it. So just Google it.
They did redo that movie, Chief, with modern stars. So at the table, people are picturing, it's not maybe Dan Aykroyd that they're picturing. It's I can't even think of the guy. I think Melissa McCarthy or whatever was one of them, but right.
Yeah.
So, bridging the generational gap.
It wasn't me.
Reintroducing, it's an old concept made new. Maybe that's what we need to do with FEMA, is we need to Ghostbust that thing and rebrand it and maybe, streamline it. I think all of the leaders within the fire service are excited for possibly where this could go. And you and I mentioned taking that USFA, making it its own entity and bringing it, under one, kind of making it its own resource, right? Ultimately, if we could do that, we're hoping that we could streamline grants and USAR and everything else, and FEMA would then be over here. Is that kind of like what you're hearing would be the best case scenario?
Well, that's what I'm hearing people want. I think the more realistic scenario is that we would probably still end up under some other overarching arm, whether that was a FEMA or a DHS or whoever it is. But we need to get back to where that fire administrator is a presidential appointee, and that we're not 2 or 3 layers underneath of the president. We need to get back to where we should have been, whether that's at cabinet level or just below at a deputy cabinet level. That's for other politicians to figure out. But I think that certainly I see us needing to consolidate all of those 6 or 7 different federal departments that are currently have their hands in our business, and allow us to do our jobs better. And if we can do our jobs better, maybe we won't need FEMA as much. Yeah.
That right. I think that's would be a great kind of solution to all this. And as we kind of bring this all to a head here and bring it back full circle, Chief, give us a little send off, maybe a motivational message to the listeners about getting involved and how we can get our voice, which hopefully comes together as one voice, per Dr. Lori, and really start to, I think, market ourselves a little bit better.
Yeah. So, I talk a lot about personal responsibility in the teachings and the training programs that I do. And I think I talk in a lot of acronym terms. And the one that I hope people take to heart, there's 2 of them, but one is BAFTK, which is back away from the keyboard. So many times we find ourselves in a position of being in front of that computer, being angry about something that just came across the screen, whether it's politics or the firehouse or somebody's Facebook feed or whatever. And we see the need to instantly reply. We're replying. And I think that what we have created in this digital environment is that sense of instant gratification has turned into a level of unprofessional performance that we as chiefs need to make sure we're policing in ourselves first, and then in our organizations second. So if we can center ourselves around that personal responsibility, and the second acronym is JDTRT, just do the right thing. There is not a book on the shelf or a plaque on the wall. I can tell you what that is. You have to learn that. You know that through your education, through your development, and through your upbringing. You know what the right thing is. And if we can do the right thing and make sure that we're focusing on service and that we're focusing on delivering the best that we can to Grandma Jones, then we'll be in a better place when somebody needs us to go talk to our politicians, and when somebody needs us to, to advocate for sprinklers, or for whatever the FEMA program might be, or the Fire Act grant, or the USAR programs, whatever the different programs are. Get your house in order first. Make sure that your personal responsibility, your physical fitness and nutrition, your moral focus, and your mental toughness, that you're doing everything you can to focus your people on providing that service. If we can do that, then we'll be in a better position to come together as this FEMA animal evolves, because right now that's what it is. It's just an animal. So as that evolves, we need to be focusing on service. We need to make sure we're doing the right thing. And please, just be AFTK.
Yep. Yeah. And with that, I just want to reiterate that we are not hammering current administration. We are not hammering former administration. Chief Bashoor and I do not want to be audited in any nature. We are actually just saying this is the current state. We understand some of the reasons for it, and are actually for a more streamlined, efficient. Yeah, you're getting the call. I better be quiet right now, right? Yeah. And I think we support a lot of aspects of the current administration, but we also need to, be able to speak freely about what we really need. And I think you really highlighted a couple of terms: be professional, maintain a service-oriented environment within your department, and I think mindset, and then just make sure you're straightening up your own house. Be personally accountable to your crew and to your department. And I think from there, the doing the right thing will fall into play, and we can then continually, I think, work on marketing what we're doing in that manner to the right people, and hopefully, make our way through. I mean, we don't know how to fail in the fire service. So, I know that this FEMA thing might seem like a bump in the road, but I think in future conversations, you and I are going to be excited about where the leadership within the fire service is taking us. And I think all they need is the support of the field. So, I think with, all the great information that you gave us, we're going to leave a lot of links. Janelle is nodding and noting. We're going to leave a lot of links to the articles, but get involved. Hold yourself personally accountable, right, Chief, and maintain that professional response. And thanks again for all your insights. Any last words?
Thanks for the opportunity to have a few last words. I think if folks can do exactly what you just said, which is to be professional, to focus on their personal responsibility, and make sure that they're thinking about what that right thing is 24 hours a day. Grandma Jones expects us to come into her house and expects us to be professional all the time. And again, those politics of everything going on around us about FEMA, about the administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat or whatever, are things that she doesn't care about when she's called us. And I need our folks to understand and hear that from me. And I talk about it in the Could You Rescue You program. My website's couldyourrescueyou.com. I talk about that personal responsibility and how we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing for Grandma Jones and for the firefighters and EMTs that are killed in the line of duty, so we can make a difference from them. The ones that die at the hands of suicide, so that we can make a difference in those statistics. We need to be able to make a difference for them. And we can't do that if we're fighting each other, if we're fighting FEMA, if we're fighting the administration. We've got to be focusing on service. And I just hope that people do that. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you tonight, and hopefully we'll see this thing come around here shortly.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. I know we have some great leaders involved, and you know, as we continually, you know, make our way through, it's probably not going to happen fast. I think we're going to see ourselves in a much better situation. So but it does come down to you, the listener. So get out there, learn something, do something, and share something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.